into grace. Oh, this might be a good time to point out that poetry book sales have been falling way off since the pandemic. So if you can find it in your heart to share a few bucks with an impoverished poet, good for you. Karma, you know? We're all building karma. Anyway, so there's Stumbling into Grace back there, along with an anthology called Love's Meditation, which sounds incredibly edifying. Her poems have appeared in many journals and anthologies and earned many awards. And I think you'll understand that once you hear her read. Please welcome Deborah Schmidt.
Thank you so much, Lee, for that lovely introduction. You pronounced my middle name correctly, which never happens. So thank you for that. It is a delight to have discovered the shared you-ism between Kathleen and Lee and myself. And it's an honor to be here with you today. Thank you to the Fellowship of Redwood City for hosting us in this lovely space and giving us a reason to come to this gorgeous town on a spring afternoon. And thanks to all of you for being here, some of you from really far away. It's lovely to see you here. I'll begin with an invocation. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Great. In the mountain temple, the daughter of the god dances to pulsing drum and gong, swirling flute and shawm. Clusters of bells awaken the universe, drawing the god's attention to human prayer. Whirling, spinning, red and pink silk skirts and scarves flying, she summons positive energy. At the ritual's climax, heavenly spirits descend in the form of light and speak through her. This is the opening of the gate of words. Thank you. Thank you. Well, as Lee mentioned, I have a number of chapbooks, but to date, no published full-length manuscript. I just sent off my first one to a potential publisher, probably one of many publishers in a row. It's called When My Soul Catches Up With Me, and it is really about poetry of place. I've been thinking so much about how the kind of ecological stewardship that is so essential for our times begins with our childhood connections to particular places. And the first landscape that I really fell in love with was in New Mexico. So I'm going to read you Halcyon Days. This poem is dedicated to the belted kingfisher, Megaceryle alcyon. Alcyone, the wind god's daughter, grieving for her beloved husband, threw herself into the sea and was changed by her father, mid-descent, into a kingfisher. Afterward, every winter for 7 days around the solstice, while she brooded on her floating nest, Aeolus calmed the Mediterranean. These were the halcyon days. Our time in Taos was just such a calm, bracketed by 2 storms, the lightning, thunder, and flash floods that swept us into New Mexico, and the soul-searing storm of divorce that drove us, wounded and weary, back to California. But in between, for 7 years of my childhood, we were held by the blue crescent of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And in the heart of that crescent was Twining Canyon, where columbine flamed in the aspen glades, the Rio Hondo danced, glinting over the stones, and the crested kingfisher flew downstream, lapis wings lit with water droplets, dipping and rising in his flight, as if weaving together river and sky. Thank you so much. When we returned to California, I reconnected with the beautiful Bay Area where I was born. And this poem was written for the redwood tree right beside my house that we planted as a little tiny Christmas tree. It's a blank verse sonnet called Evensong. It starts with an epigraph from Rilke, from Verger, that I translated. I'll read you the English. For isn't this the time when it's essential to make connections subtle and devout? Strong as they are, it's that the earth is strong, and such is her plaint that we hardly know her. Evensong. So I have lived beside this redwood tree for half my life now, ever conscious of its generous, strong spirit, the way it holds the earth between its toes, the wheeling stars between its fingers. Yet until this year, I never knew that every day at dusk, it holds a flock of birds. After the time of gleaning seeds and darting after insects, they come together, warblers, finches, sparrows, to sit as one, these singers, silently among the upper branches while the light lies still and golden and incoming wisps of fog turn rosy in the lowering sun. It is a winged and feathered way of prayer. Thank you. Another California locale that is very special to our family is the Lakes Basin in California, where we have a connection going back to the gold rush and where we have a tiny cabin. If you want to go up there in the winter, you have to carry everything on your back, at least until now when my son-in-law has a snowmobile. But you used to have to do that, and you would have to ski or snowshoe up about a mile. This one is about that, and it's unrhymed hexameter, so 6 beats per line. Another gift of stars. My snowshoes' metal teeth bite through the icy crust, one crunch against another. Ahead of me, Pilar goes quietly on her skis, and I wish I'd brought mine. I'm loath to interrupt the stillness of the woods with my too noisy steps, or bare the snowlit dark with yellow rings of glare from my encroaching lamp. We'd hoped the light would last, but errands multiplied, and dusk falls early now. I start to feel the weight I carry, all the food, green apples, half a ham, and soon the uphill trek has tapped my energy. I try to keep the pace, but past the second bend, I stop to rest, and then remember to look up. I thought it might be clear, but I can hardly hold the wonder of this night. Between the silhouettes of black, wind-livened pines, a bright largesse of stars is flung into a sky like fleece submerged in dye, a giant upturned vat of deepest indigo. Looking down again, I see around my feet another gift of stars, ice crystals fired by my lamp, and suddenly my weariness has flown. What is my little burden, my small need for rest, against the ancient sky and distances beyond all that my human mind can comprehend? And how can I forget sometimes to look up and be glad? Thank you so much. This one is also from the cabin, and it's a tribute to one of the marvelous creatures who can sometimes be seen around there, or perhaps only heard. Hermit thrush. For days at dusk I have heard you, your call that seems to answer itself, so that I thought you might be 2 birds. You have sung from beyond the far edge of the clearing where the stream from the spring collects in the black pool, and I have not known who you were. I searched all the guides in the cabin and found nothing like your voice. I drew a staff on blank paper and wrote out your song in G major in 3/4 time. Now, as the dog and I, returning from our evening walk, emerge from the woods to take the road down the hill, I hear you once more, a clear, sustained whistle ending in a 3-note warble. This motif, always repeated 4 times, varying in pitch, each repetition separated by the same space. You sing, then fly ahead of me, perch invisibly in the lower branches of a fir, and sing again. If I were fearless and fancy-free, with no husband to feed or grown children to worry about me, how I would love to keep following you. Where would you take me, little unseen bird? Perhaps to the place where the trees open to the river, where the river opens to the rising moon, where all is a silver hush, apples and wet rock, ripples and wet rock, giving back moonlight, no sounds but water over stone and you. Thank you. This poem is a celebration of our kinship with our fellow creatures. And I was playing with using internal rhyme to define a 4-beat line within a line of pentameter, or 5 beats. I was inspired by a poem of Jericho Brown's called Dark, which has blues lyrics embedded in free verse. Wild. Urban people that we are, we think the wild is something far, as set apart in spirit as in place, a destination, coral reef, rainforest, mountain peak, both distant and diminished, under threat. And yet, while we're asleep, night creatures prowl the landscapes that we call our own. The brave coyote, fox, and owl come out to hunt the city canyons and the silent parks, the dewy darkness of our still backyards, while divided from us just by skin, integument so brief and thin is all the wilderness within, the seeth of blood and bone, of synapse, sinew, still unknown, untamed, its every rhythm owning us kin to all the beings of the wild. Thank you, and I will leave you with one more. This one set back at home in El Sobrante, near the edge where we live, near the edge of Wildcat Regional Park. For those of you who enjoy tracking the form, and I know there are a number of poets here, formal poets too, this one is in iambic pentameter also with stanzas of 11 lines. Lines 3 and 6 rhyme, and so do lines 8, 9, and 10. And then the last line of each stanza is kind of a throwaway musing one, unrhymed. Cabbage whites. This is the mating day for cabbage whites, that for such fairy creatures, pale silk, veined like new leaves, brushed with tender green, we have failed to invent a name any less mundane as one sad proof of our dull, wordless state. It must have been after a day spent stooped in pulling weeds and bringing water. Yes, common they are, but so are newborn babies, sea and stars, all no less magical for being ours. And we should reconsider cabbages. In Pseudo-Greek, we do a little better. Pieris rape, pieris of the turnips, or of the cabbages, pieris brassicae. Pieris, singular, or Pierides, is much more interesting, being the name of the Muses, or the Macedonian maids who challenged the Muses to a trial of song, and for so daring, and for losing, too, were turned at once to chattering magpies who, for all their wit, are mimics through and through. Or were the maidens turned to butterflies? For here they are, our muses of the turnips, or of the cabbages, our garden muses, couples twirling through the summer air like the twinkling balls on a majorette's baton, fluttering at each end of a hidden link, an invisible axis that holds each dancing pair at a distance ruled, peculiar to themselves. They spin around each other like double suns, binary stars whose orbit knows just one candescent heart, one arc that must be run. But these are not millennial fire folk. These are beings perhaps just hours old, whose whole lifespan is measured out in weeks, who freely spend their vital force to woo, to win, to carry life to life, their winking, whirling dance part of the overarching round. Late in the day, we will find two, joined at the tail, pulsing in the grass, made one at last and tumbled from the air, vulnerable, tender, brave, and fair, four silky wings enfolded in a prayer. So who are we to think of holding back? Thank you so much.
Well, Emerson, Thoreau, there's a long tradition within Unitarianism of not just respect, but devotion to nature. And I think Deborah embodies that devotion in not just in her themes, but in her attention to the way that the language works, Anyway, I'm going to think about those magpies, a little bit more. I tend to think of myself as a mockingbird, and then the question becomes, who are the real poets? The birds that just sing out there, do whatever they're programmed to do, or the birds that, pick up somebody else's song and carry it further, So I guess you can tell which side I'm on. All right, so our next reader, someone named Lee Rossi. Lee Rossi says he's reluctant to say anything personal about himself. But he will say that he was born near the confluence of Greater Appalachia and the Deep South. Think about where that is, okay? Greater Appalachia, Deep South, okay, we're talking about the Midwest, I think. During his lifetime, the human population grew from 2 billion to 8 billion. CO2 levels rose from less than 300 parts per million to over 400. He believes in the laws of physics, okay, and his religion is kindness. That sounds plausible. Here I am, Lee Rossi. I thought that since today I'm reading with a couple of other Unitarians, that I would read on Unitarian type themes. And so let me read a poem, our first poem in my new book, which is about interdependence. We all know that interdependence is an important theme within Unitarian Universalism. So this poem is called Microcosmology. That is to say, it's the cosmology of the very small. Microcosmology. Everything fits into everything else. We know that, who come bursting from our mothers in a gush of being. Our children already nestled in sacks tucked safely inside. Infinite regression sends us back into the womb after womb from which we grew. There was a soup, we're told, where the first living creatures were brewed. Not something you eat, but eat it they apparently did, until there was nothing left but waste oxygen and each other. How long did they take to find a taste for those other squirming thinglets? Eat it or screw it? And in which order? The rush to colonize never stopped. Except in imagination, we can't stuff ourselves back into that ever-expanding bottle, which itself was once just something infinitely dense, unimaginably hot, and before that, not even not. Something to chew on. Okay. In our church this past month, the theme has been transformation. So I'm going to read a poem about transformation. There are many poems about transformation in this book. And there's an epigraph from Dean Young, one of my favorite poets. He says, "Why aren't we more terrified of sleep, of consciousness extinguished and no guarantee of return?" And you can think about that at 3 a.m., you know. You'd think that after all these years of dropping dead every night and every morning rolling back the stone, of rising from my vampire's crypt, a forest of toothpicks sprouting from my chest, I'd have some faith, some trust that just like the sun coming up in the east, I'd lift from my cluttered bed my rumpled, sweat-soaked sheets and pillow. Don't I believe in physics? What about biochemistry? But no, after 500 lives, the memory of so many deaths darkens everything. Every day, the ceiling gets lower, clouds rumbling with comets and jets. And what do they tell you for comfort? Think about the afterlife, they say. But that's all I think about. Or forget about it, they say. It's a long way off. But how can I forget when even in sleep I have to listen to that raving madman, myself, shouting out the mystery of birth, my constant mistakes? How many dark alleys have you wandered in your dreams? How many monsters met and been devoured by? I'm telling you, if I could say goodbye to it all, become an angel, one of those who never said no to anyone but himself, one of the luminous singing host who never traveled in darkness, I'd take up my wings and sweep the closets and corners of my past with a mighty shiver and flap, blowing it all away as I rose into a glory like the sun. Yeah. Pure wishfulness on my part, obviously. Okay, so this is a little different in tone and approach. You probably know that Unitarians are famously concerned with social problems, of which we have too many in our society. But it's a situation which does not prevent many of my fellow citizens from ignoring them, those problems, and inventing other purely imaginary threats. So this next poem inhabits a kind of false consciousness. Can I say that to you guys? Mauvaise foi in the French. And dates back to the rise of modern conservatism. I'm that old, oh geez. The John Birch Society, way back there in the 50s, 60s. And they had a campus wing called the Young Americans for Freedom, of which I was not a member, but certainly some of my fellow seminarians were. And you should know the speaker of this poem is a Roman Catholic seminarian, all right, called Young Americans for Freedom. There we were, 4 or 5 seminarians in the back of the auditorium. Oh, we're watching the Republican candidate for president speaking at this. And this was 1964, so you may or may not know who that was. Okay, so we're in the back of the auditorium, almost spilling over the lip of the mezzanine, waiting for the man of the moment to appear. He was a Jew, and we his sworn enemies. Politics makes strange bedfellows, that's what I was told. And before we'd lose our country to godless communists, we'd make allies of the devil and his spawn. That sounded okay to me, although I'd never met an atheist, much less a communist. The devil, however, was familiar, a constant companion, always urging me to take another path, constantly pointing out how narrow the high wire I trod, how deep the drop. I stared at the crowd, the hats, hairnets, and bald spots below me. The music crescendoed, and there he was, the senator from Arizona, polished, patrician, silver-haired, tribune of the gainfully retired, refugees from the snow belt, its frostbite and cinders. We are surrounded by enemies, he told us, not just in Asia and Europe, but in our own country. People who would take our homes and businesses, take away our beliefs, troublemakers who want to sit next to you at lunch counters, who'd forced you to accept them as equals. Freedom is a gift we have to protect from those jealous of our freedoms. I'd learned enough about the virtue of selfishness to know that taxes are bad, that government saps your moral strength, Delilah clipping Samson's hair. We'd been taught to look in the mirror and see Satan. We had so many names for evil, beatniks and the UN, homosexuals, secularism, civil rights, the Federal Reserve. So many lions, so few Daniels. Water cannons and police dogs weren't enough. Not riot police, not even Bull Connor spitting into a bullhorn. When would we realize that all our weapons would never save us? Not until we declared war on America. That's an angry little poem. I'd forgotten just how angry it is. Okay, my last poem is, why did I say it was, oh, here it is. Is in, Unitarian Universalism has a very multifarious tradition, you know, and some of it's Christian, and some of it's Buddhist, and some of it's, who knows, materialist, godless atheism, you know, and I'm part of the godless atheist wing of Unitarian Universalism. I'll call it the anti-spiritual tradition of Unitarian Universalism. What did I write here? I said, despite its roots in Christianity and the hocus-pocus theology of Aquinas and Augustine, I studied both Aquinas and Augustine when I was in the seminary. My UU faith is closer in sympathy to what is usually referred to as materialism, okay? The only real thing is, you know, what you see and experience. And so am I. Here I am. Here's my poem, Cricket, which I will share with you. If I use the word God in a poem, does it mean I believe in God or that I don't? Once upon a time, God was the water we swam in. Do fish thank the water for letting them swim? When I was 17, I wrote my first poem, but stopped writing 6 months later. I didn't want to be a confessional poet with nothing to confess. Guilt, I had plenty of that, the way that tall grass has chiggers. My conscience sang like a field of crickets. It was only the sun, you might say, warming them like pots on a stove, as natural as banana skins going black. But I wanted to believe that someone was watching my every move, keeping track in some record book. Don't you see, without some gentle jailer surveilling everything, my kind of life, small as a chigger or a cricket, would go unremarked. And now at 77, I don't know what to believe. I watch the grasses dry and whiten, the stream trickle to a standstill, and still I sing that one field, the long grasses, the bright and withering sun. Thank you. So let's give it up for Lee Rossi. Wasn't he great? Yes. Okay, and now on to our last Unitarian poet. Well, actually, there are probably other Unitarians on the open mic. At any rate, Kathleen McClung has 5 poetry collections. 5, she nods. Her work appears widely, and I can tell you, in literary journals, anthologies, and the web. From 21 to 23, she served as guest editor of The MacGuffin, a Michigan-based journal now celebrating its 40th anniversary, in which I have only appeared once, Kathleen. Kathleen teaches at Skyline College in San Bruno, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute in San Francisco, and privately. So let's hear from Kathleen.
Thank you very much, Lee. Send us some more work at the MacGuffin. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all on this beautiful spring day. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Deborah, for beautiful poems, and thank you all for coming, and Redwood City Unitarian Fellowship for hosting us. I'm going to read one poem from a book that's going to come out this fall. I learned about a week ago that I'm finally going to have a new book out. It's been a long haul, submitting for several years, and I'm delighted to say that my book, Questions of Buoyancy, will be published by Longship Press this fall, and I'm just delighted. And the lesson is persist, persist. This poem is set in Pescadero, which is not too far from here we are in Redwood City, and it's called Graveyard Pescadero. Except for a leaf blower just past our line of sight, it's almost quiet here. The engine, snug against someone's spine, will sputter and die soon. We watch 3 deer in the field across the road, alert, ears pricked up, grazing postponed while the groundskeeper works. Even when he finishes, winds the hose into a knot, the trio, silent and gray as these stones, will linger. Is my camera a weapon? Do we mean them harm? I read Willie S. Finney's headstone out loud to Tom. It is pleasant to die if there be gods. It is sad to live if there be none. His people chose plain words in 1873, paid someone to chisel them on marble. Smoke from fire 200 miles north alters the afternoon light, improves every photograph I take in Mount Hope. When I was 13, my father made a dark room in our basement, knew which chemicals to use for the baths in shallow trays. He specialized in still lives, his chessmen on their squares, ashtray glued to plaid beanbag. I did not apprentice under the red bulb, did not scatter his ashes into the Pacific when he died alone on the bedroom floor. He paid in advance for someone else to skipper a boat, open a canister, tilt it overboard. Thank you. A couple years before the COVID pandemic, I served as a forewoman on a jury, and we were considering the case of vehicular manslaughter in which a child was killed. And it was a very, very emotionally troubling experience. I'd never been on a jury before, and I'm not sure I ever want to be on one again. But after the trial was over, I started writing poems to kind of help process and heal from the experience. And so I wrote enough poems to complete a chapbook called A Juror Must Fold In on Herself. And I'm going to read 2 poems from that chapbook. This is the opening poem, called Field Notes, Hall of Justice Parking Lot. Already nearly full with early birds, the parking lot on Bryant comforts me. Bland rituals, square stub on my dashboard, new numerals each day, gruff employee beckoning almost imperceptibly to the first available space. And yes, every morning I glimpse the defendant in his tie, arriving on his bike across the street, locking it with a gigantic U to the Hall of Justice rack, the only bike. He may know I watch him, linger in my reliable car, CD of Mozart etudes, spinning, spinning. No contact is permitted, no words or gestures or notes on yellow sheets ripped from legal pads. I keep all my questions to myself. I am no renegade juror, will not be smashing the system this summer. The judge explained contempt of court to us. It sounded ominous. I was already spending my vacation in a crummy swivel chair. Why prolong the ordeal, committing the extreme offense of asking a cyclist, "How are you holding up? Have you found a zone of peace?" I watch him instead. Mozart wailing. And I'm going to read The Juror's Lament, which is a rondo in 3 parts. Part 1, box. We must not speak, return to scene of crime, bleak dive bar street, or worse, research online the cast of players in this cheerless room. Plump, sneakered judge instructing us, assume no guilt for now. She looks like Gertrude Stein. Stern prosecutor, watchful like a mime. Public defender, sleek in Calvin Klein. Accused at table, silent as a tomb. We must not speak, but pay 15 to park, arrive at 9, inch through antique metal detector line, and take our seats inside this box. Resume our stony faces, doused in dull perfume of civic duty, steno pads. Confined, we must not speak. 2, locked hallway. A smaller room awaits us 12, who wordlessly observed from swivel chairs. We heard this case, murky surveillance video, paid expert witnesses who swore they know who did it, how, and why. So much has blurred these weeks within our box. We have endured the bloody photographs, the vague, absurd insinuations. Now it's time to go. A smaller room will house our conversation, long deferred, while lawyers spun their tales of what occurred in winter 803, 4 years ago. We shuffle down a hall, reluctant row of citizens. If we convict, he is assured a smaller room. 3, verdict. I print guilty with ballpoint pen and sign my name. Below, I add the date and time from Melvin's phone, 11:43. We've made our peace. We wrestled mightily for days, the bailiff locking us at 9, the grim defendant on hall bench, assigned or self-imposed vigil as anodyne. His presence brought us no tranquility. I print guilty, relieved to finish, stand, and leave behind the awful pad marked Juror 6. Blue lines, thin horizontal bars, a penitentiary. Success or reaching anonymity? Perhaps. The punishment our judge defines. I print guilty. Thank you. I'm going to read maybe 3, maybe 4 poems from my book, The Typists Play Monopoly, which came out many years ago, and I have some back in the back I'd love for you to have. This first one is a villanelle, and it's a persona poem. I like to imagine being other people, taking me out of myself. So this poem is called Gilbert and Ed Washing the Wheelchairs, Telegraph Avenue Coin Op. We come each Saturday. Sometimes we sing, tell knock-knock jokes to lighten, lift our chore. Car wash duet. Our prayer for bodies aching in wards of orderlies and moans, in wings with Ansel Adams prints on walls, half-dome decor. We come each Saturday. Sometimes we sing Sinatra, Fly Me to the Moon. We bring our boombox in the van, open both doors, duet, our prayer for bodies aching, confined to narrow beds, remembering a picnic, August 1934. We come each Saturday. Sometimes we sing, but mostly listen to high-powered spray, rinsing these fleets of unfilled seats, each week a dozen more. Our prayer for bodies aching, we never meet, yet surely know, those whispering our names and words we've heard somewhere before. We come each Saturday. Sometimes we sing, our bodies aching. This next poem is a sonnet, and I read in the Chronicle a few years ago about a historic raccoon that was 13 years and 10 months old, the longest raccoon in human history. And so that begins with a little epigraph from the Chronicle. Merlin is 13 years and 10 months old. He's to become the oldest raccoon ever on record in California and will break the record for the current oldest raccoon in North America. The Elder. He sleeps through nights, his prowling over. Wild, the others seize the dark, die young by 3. Hunched, hardly masked, Merlin has us beguiled. How has he weathered his captivity since losing Lance, his brother, long ago, since losing any chance to steal away? His keeper holds him close in this photo and rubs his bony spine as if to say, "You do belong with us." She feeds him grapes, mice, trout pureed, and maybe Merlin purrs, a ragged hum, resigned to life with no escapes, no redwood groves, no toppling garbage cans, neighbors disturbed from dreams of thieves. Do human hands console, relieve his aches, return enough of all we stole? And I think I'm going to end with a sestina. I love writing sestinas. I just